Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to be with you today, and we are looking forward to welcoming Beth Huggins and also Dr. Nolert from the College of Engineering. Dr. Nolert will be our MC for today, and he will lead the discussion and Q&A session towards the end of Beth's presentation. So let's give everyone about 2 minutes to join. And so promptly at 12:02, we'll start with Dr. Nolert's introduction of the Sooners Around the World program and with Beth Huggins. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you next time when we travel to Melbourne, Australia.
So we'll get started with the webinar here in just a couple minutes. We'll leave a few minutes for as people are joining. Looking forward to the discussion, our speaker today, and finding out a little bit more about the exciting things that some of our alumni have been up to, the things that the ways in which they've been able to go out and influence and change the world in positive ways. It's going to be really exciting, really looking forward to that. And we'll take just a couple minutes as people are still joining, and then we'll get started here soon. So take a deep breath and take just a moment, and we'll be on in just a minute or two. All right. I wanted to welcome all of you to this next installment of Sooners Around the World, which represents a network of more than 200,000 alumni and friends of the University of Oklahoma. Starting in the summer of 2021, the Office of Alumni Engagement launched this new 60-minute virtual travel network and discovery series, providing limitless possibilities for worldwide engagement. Join us as we span the globe to reconnect with alumni and friends from the OU community. We'll have a chance to catch up with fellow graduates, meet interesting people with a shared OU experience, and we'll learn how our OU peers are impacting for good their communities, their chosen industries, and in general, life in their corner of the world. So if you need more information about this program or this series of videos, please contact Lisa Tucker. Her email address is ljtucker, all one word, @ou.edu. You'll find that email address at the website. Also, as we progress through this series, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you think of a question after the webinar has ended, please feel free to send your question by email to Lisa Tucker, and she can get that forwarded to the appropriate person, and we'll try to get back to you. So today it is my great pleasure to introduce Beth Huggins. Well, before I introduce her, let me just say a bit about myself. My name is Uli Nollert. I'm a faculty member in chemical engineering, have been at OU for 30 plus years and have had the fabulous experience of teaching many great students, such as Beth Huggins. Beth, I first met her over 10 years ago as she was an undergraduate in chemical engineering at the University of Oklahoma in Norman. And she was my student in a couple of classes, and as well as I spent time advising her. After graduating, she's going to tell you a bunch of details about her life and all the wonderful things that she did after graduation. But I'll just briefly summarize that she went to work in Africa, then went from there to Nepal, started just working in a variety of NGO type relief operations, and has risen, and people have recognized her great abilities to be a leader and to make positive changes in really meaningful ways in various circumstances around the world. What I remember from Beth as a student, I have seen her grow tremendously over the last 10 years from the sort of typical high achieving student that we see at OU that has a very clear vision for what they're going to do and how they're going to accomplish that, to somebody that is faced with actual problems in the real world and comes up with novel, creative, and compelling solutions to try to solve that. And with that, let me bring Beth onto the program, introduce her. We have met several times since she has graduated. Every time we have a fabulous conversation. I'm so excited, Beth, to see you here, and really looking forward to hearing what you have to say to us.
Thanks, Dr. Nollert. Thanks so much. And yeah, it's my honor to be here, and I'm super grateful for this opportunity and for all of the people joining us today and who made this possible. I'm going to share my screen so that I can start by just sharing some of the beauty that I get to experience on a day-to-day basis. And when I think about my life and my journey from OU to Nepal, I think about a lot of things, but mostly I think about how much adventure and surprise and changes have been in my life. And that if you had asked me 10 years ago if I thought I would be in Nepal or doing work with farmers, doing environmental restoration work, I wouldn't have said so. I had a very different path in mind. Like Dr. Nollert mentioned, I was pretty determined and sure of what I was going to do in the world and how I was going to do it. But starting that path at OU was really, it was a very big time in my life. It was the first time that I had gotten out away from my kind of small rural town upbringing by two extraordinary parents that are here. Hi, Mom and Dad. And it was an opportunity for me to begin my exploration. And so when I arrived at OU, the most challenging thing wasn't looking at apparatuses like this. These are some equipment from a unit ops laboratory class that all chemical engineering students take. My class was taught by Dr. Nollert, so I thought it'd be fun to show these, but these weren't the most mind-boggling things I experienced at OU. What was more mind-boggling to me at the time was I was sitting in a classroom the size of my entire hometown my first day in intro to general chemistry. And in between that, I was also really determined to accomplish and be high achieving in whatever I wanted to do. And so from really early on in college, I got really involved. I did a lot of student leadership activities, spent a lot of time in student life at OU, for which I'm really, really grateful for. And I did a lot of volunteering. This is one of my first volunteering trips abroad. with a bunch of pre-medical students, and we went to Honduras. And it was in this trip that really something shifted in me, that I had this taste for what engineering and technology could do for some of the problems that the world faced. And there was like a door that opened up inside of me for what I wanted to discover more of this. I wanted to be able to find out what other problems existed and how can we actually solve them. And that's really in a short view of how I got to Nepal. But I think that if once you get into any industry or profession, and especially international development work, you'll learn that we really don't know as much as we want to know. And that I still remember my senior year capstone class in chemical engineering at OU. My advisor, I think our capstone group, we had gotten to this answer for what we thought we were supposed to get to. And we went into our advisor and we asked, is this the right outcome? Did we solve the problem right? And he says, well, you can only ask yourselves that. You're supposed to just present what you found. There's no right or wrong answer. All you can do is discover. And I think that is really true for a lot of what I believe about the world and the problems that the world faces, is that we have a lot of discovery to do and a lot of listening and observing and trying to do from that the best that we can. And so how did I wind up in Nepal? Well, in 2015, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck Nepal and devastated the countryside. More than 9,000 people died. More than 500,000 people were left homeless. Not that much different than what's happening in Syria and Turkey right now. And I didn't have any connection to Nepal, really. I had never thought about traveling to Nepal. It never really was a place that I thought I would find myself. But I luckily had two colleagues that had been in Nepal during the earthquakes, and they announced online that they were going to start a rebuilding effort. And so I reached out and I said, do you need a fundraiser? Do you need support? What can I do? And they said, you should really just come and help us get this started. And I had graduated. I had started working for a bio-waste conversion organization in East Africa, but was looking for opportunities to get into the field. I didn't want to work from a desk. I didn't want to work from the United States. I really wanted to be immersed in the challenges that are around the world and really be surrounded by the people that I wanted to support in solving those challenges. And so I went to Nepal. And I thought I was going to go for 3 months. I put these photos in there just because they're beautiful, but also because, what makes the tallest mountains of the world in Nepal, like this one, this picture of Mount Everest, is also why there are earthquakes. And that duality of Nepal is something that constantly has amazed me in my time there, but also is something that the people of Nepal have comprehended and dealt with for centuries. And it's something really profound and beautiful. And I can't even begin to explain all of the fascinating things it's taught me. But where is Nepal? Nepal is right here. Here's the view of South Asia, a little bit zoomed out. And for those of you that aren't familiar, Mount Everest is in Nepal. The capital city is Kathmandu. And that Nepal is one of the most biodiverse places on the planet because it has both sea level altitude and plains in the south, as well as it has 8 of the 14 peaks that are above 8,000 meters tall. So it's a fascinating place, both landscape wise, ecologically wise. But I was there because of the earthquake. And really, I didn't know that much about Nepal, but I knew my friends, my colleagues were starting this organization or this rebuilding program, and that they were really focused on long-term rebuilding. Much of the devastation that happened in Nepal was across rural communities. About 80% of Nepal's population lives in rural communities. The population is only 30 million, and its land mass is really small. It's like Nepal's landmass is about 80% of Oklahoma's landmass. And it's sandwiched between two huge giant land masses of China and Tibet and India. And but I was there to support this organization and try to support in whatever way I could. And at the time, that was doing community assessment. So I would go around and talk to people about what happened during the earthquake. I also did a fundraiser for the project because that was what was needed at the time. Any startup project will tell you that they need funding more than anything else. And this was no different, but we also, the way that we wanted to do the rebuilding program was to support local communities to build using environmentally sustainable materials. And that was primarily because of the devastated areas being in rural spaces and being really hard to reach. And so if you could create building materials in the community itself, you would be cutting down on the cost to import mass building materials from outside rural areas, but also you would be able to create job opportunities for people. And after an earthquake, there's a lot of things that has been devastated and people are traumatized emotionally. The land is difficult to trust. And then additionally to that, economically wise, everybody lost their homes. In this region of Nepal, 99% of every building fell down. And so in terms of how to rebuild, we wanted to focus on creating a way to incorporate community action in that rebuilding and really give people jobs, give people opportunities, start to restore some of their economic stability, and then start to build community structures and homes. So I showed up in Nepal, really excited. There weren't any buildings, like I mentioned, so I pitched a tent like all the other volunteers at the time. And little did I know, I thought I was going to be there for 3 months. And then I found myself in a similar tent to this about 5 years later, still doing this work. And a lot of people always ask me like, wow, how could you live in a tent for so long? Or, wow, this is so wild. And, you know, I say, yeah, I would have never imagined living in a tent for so long. But I think that when you do something that you really believe in and you do something that you really feel is meaningful and impactful, you can do anything. Like it doesn't even faze me to think about how much time I spent in a tent because I felt like that was what was needed in order for me to be of service in the way that I felt was most helpful and meaningful at the time. And I've constantly learned ever since I came to Nepal. I thought I was like going to give and support. And what I feel like has happened is I have gained so much. I've learned so much about people, about really resilient people, people who are land stewards and who have been food producers for centuries and carriers of their cultural traditions for centuries. I've learned that how resilient people are, that after even their homes were devastated, I would meet people in the community who would want to welcome me for a meal or for a tea or offer me to stay the night in their kind of, you know, temporary houses that they built right after the earthquake. And I learned that a lot of hands can do a lot of work. We started doing rebuilding efforts and inviting people from all over the world to support that. And so we did a lot of community projects. Our first project was to build a brick production center, like I mentioned earlier. This center would produce compressed, stabilized earth blocks. We produced over 350,000 earth blocks. These are solar dried earth blocks, and it's a combination of soil, sand, and 10% cement. And there is this manual compression brick press you can see on the left that is what makes these bricks. We hired locals and trained those locals and then worked with a series of experts to get the right combination of materials to make a strong load-bearing brick. And then used these bricks to build first a school. There's a primary school we built. And then also we started doing other types of construction projects as well. This is an earth bag house. Earth bags is a building technology that uses polyethylene bags full of soil and also a percentage of cement. And then those bags are laid stacked on top of one another. It's a technology that was founded by Cal Earth Institute in California. And it's a really seismically safe building technology. So we started using other technologies as well, trying to demonstrate and give opportunity for local communities to learn and then implement whatever building style they were most interested in. We also learned really early on when we first arrived, we were like super eager and wanted to rebuild. We were there to rebuild. We wanted to support people to rebuild. But as soon as I started talking to people weren't ready to build. They're farmers. They're people who lost. Most farmers at the time had lived in 3-story stone houses with no infrastructure, like no reinforcement, no steel, sometimes wood beams as reinforcement, but it was a really old building technology, and every house fell down. And so a lot of livestock was killed because traditionally in the first floor of the house, the livestock would have their resting place. And then the second floor is where the family would stay. And then the third floor is where they would keep all of their grain. They're rice farmers, they're lentil farmers. They grow everything they need to eat in an entire year for their families, and they store it. And then they store the seed for next year's crops. And all of that was lost. And so farmers were back out in the fields. They didn't have time to think about rebuilding a house, nor did they trust that it was going to be strong. They needed time to heal. And when we started talking with people about what other things they struggled in, everybody talks about agriculture. They're all farmers. They work really hard. They make really little money. And they don't want their kids to be farmers. And they want to find a way to make more money and not have to work so hard. And so we started talking and found out that there were some fruit trees in the village, and that fruit trees could be a way to plant trees with farmers and help build the local ecology, but also support their livelihoods to be better. And particularly, we found out that coffee would grow in this region. So we started planting and distributing coffee trees with farmers. And this was also in a way to just get to know them more, to understand their lives more, do something that they were interested in. I mean, we were interested in rebuilding, but they were needing to make livelihoods again. And so we wanted to support them in that. And we planted other trees as well, not just coffee. We planted avocado trees. We also worked with young people in the schools. The local schools were asking for support. Their attendance rates were really low after the earthquake. And then additionally, another reason people are moving away from rural Nepal is the lack of jobs, but also the lack of educational opportunities. And so we started working with young people to try and create spaces to influence their educational experiences, help them explore and think creatively and critically. And then slowly, as we started these other types of programs and started looking into these other areas, people were ready to build homes. And so that's when we really got to support home reconstruction. We supported over 120 homes in this region of Nepal using these earth bricks and using all local materials and local labor to do so, which is really an unbelievable experience to have had, and something that, I'll always think about of how much. With an intention we had this intention, we wanted to be environmentally sustainable, and we were able to wait for the community to come around and kind of bridge this need to solve this problem that people needed to rebuild their homes, but rather than just importing materials and doing it really quick, allowing community themselves to do it. And so now there's a social enterprise in this area that produces these earth bricks still today and supports various projects with those earth bricks. We had also by this point created a space for people to come and learn and experience what service work could do, but also what rural Nepal was really like. We had people from all around the world. And by this point, we've had around 800 people from more than 45 different countries around the world come and experience what rural Nepal is all about. And for me, by this point, I was like all in. I fell in love with Nepal. I fell in love with this work. Like I said, I didn't even feel like I was living in a tent because I really felt that what we were doing was important and meaningful and impactful. And I wanted to see it through, and I still want to see it through today. And I've done some of the hardest work I've ever experienced, but I've grown a lot to appreciate what it takes to put food on a table, what it takes to restore and be a steward of land and our environment. This is me planting trees with farmers. This is me carrying, you can really see on my head, they carry with a strap. That's how they carry things really heavy in Nepal, and it's really hard. This is here I'm planting rice with local women. All of the rice cultivation in this part of Nepal is done by hand. It's hand planted and then hand cut and then hand threshed and carried on backs to homes from all of the fields. It's really remarkable. And Conscious Impact's work has continued to grow. We've planted more than 20,000 different trees in this region with more than 350 local farmers. We have seen those trees fruit. So on the left, you have avocado fruiting. On the right, you have coffee fruiting. And really, we've been able to witness people's lives being changed by these trees, and for farmers to be excited about planting something. And these trees aren't taking over their rice fields. We're not saying stop growing rice and only plant trees. What we're able to do with these trees is use underutilized land. And so land that is currently not being cultivated or is forest land, we're able to support with growing coffee. Our work has also expanded to do other types of things. Now that the community doesn't need a lot of rebuilding, we are doing community infrastructure projects. This was a water project we did last year for 96 homes in a village. And this year we're doing another project for 82 homes. This is also really life-changing things. Community members, when you think about resiliency, they have all of the right things. They have land, they have the ability to grow food, they are strong, but they lack some really simple infrastructure that can make their lives really, really easy. Or much easier, not really easy, but much easier, like water. Previously to this project, the community, these 96 households shared about 8 community access points. So people would go every day with cans and collect water. Everybody paid the same amount, even though different people consumed different amounts. And it led to a lot of conflict and challenges, as well as just a lot of water loss. Their system was about 25 years old, and it was kind of put together piece by piece, but not using the right technology. And so a lot of water would leak out of the pipes or the tanks. And so we worked with an engineer from Nepal to design this system, and went from 9 community access points to 96 household taps, all of which can be turned on at the same time. It's a gravity-fed system, and now people have access to water all day long, whereas before they only had access to water a couple of hours per day, just to conserve water. Now they have access to water all day long. We also have expanded our youth programs to still support rural education, to support young people's experiences. This is a group of young students testing an earth block, testing the compression strength of an earth block. There's an immediate test that you do for each brick to make sure that it passes a standard. And then there's a later test that once it cures, after about 8 weeks in the curing process, then you do a second test. We do other types of workshops with young people also, like story writing and creative expression workshops to try to encourage young people to participate in topics about their community, whether that's ethnic discrimination or gender roles or what change they want to see in their own community. And it's been a really beautiful process to watch this work and to be a part of it. And we're so grateful. I'm so grateful for all of the people that have supported this work. There's been tons of people, both from my college years to my family, my entire family, all my friends. This is one of our staff members in Nepal that I get the pleasure of working with, standing with his son and his wife. And this is his new house built on the left side. And then on the right side, he has his outside kitchen. A lot of families in Nepal use firewood for their kitchens. And so they typically have their kitchen to be separate than where they sleep. And he decided to build kind of a traditional house for his kitchen, traditional style, and then merged with kind of the newer style of house. And this is something that's really unique about Nepal too, is that it's changing really rapidly. There's a lot of things changing about our world, and Nepal is not different, but it's experiencing modernity really fast. And the earthquake both contributed to that in positive and negative ways. But just to go back and give a little plug about Conscious Impact, if you'd like to read more about our work, Conscious Impact is online. You can go to our website, consciousimpact.org. We're a 501c3 registered nonprofit in need of donations to do projects like this water project I mentioned for 82 households this year, as well as the agricultural projects we continue to do, the youth projects we continue to do, and overall just trying to support rural communities in Nepal to build resiliency, both environmental resiliency, but also community resiliency, trying to create ways for them to stay connected and work together as a community to see the change that they'd like to see. There's our Instagram page. You can follow us there. Here I am with a lot of our staff. We took a trip to a farm on this day. And I get to continue to explore Nepal and this beautiful landscape and learn from it. There's a lot of things, like I said, Nepal is changing really rapidly, and it's really exciting and interesting. It's a wonderful place. And for those of you that have ever wanted to visit, it's a great place to visit. Nepal is most famous for the mountains, of course, and for hiking or trekking. They have what's called tea house treks throughout the mountain ranges of Nepal. And the tea house treks are, you hike all day and every night you sleep at a lodge. It's basically like a stone lodge that's really beautiful, and they cook you food. And so you don't have to carry anything. It's not quite like backpacking. There's also options to do backpacking in Nepal, but the tea house treks are most famous and extraordinary. There's also Kathmandu and the beautiful history and culture of the people there. Kathmandu was the center of trade for a long time. It's where the Silk Route, the Silk Route went through Kathmandu, the Salt Route went through Kathmandu. So it had this really early influence of a lot of people and places and a lot of different cultures kind of merging. And you can see it in the architecture, in the development of the art. There was written language, really phenomenally studied art really early on in Kathmandu. You can see some of the old temples and structures in these photos are like this door that's intricately carved wood. Here's some more. These are pictures of Bhaktapur, which is in Kathmandu Valley. There's both like a beautiful combination of Hinduism religion as well as Buddhism. It's almost like the two exist in one in Nepal. And that there's beautiful Buddhist monasteries and stupas, as well as temples and Hindu priests and people studied. This is a memorial from the earthquake. It was actually on the year anniversary of the earthquake. There's a memorial in one of the Kathmandu centers. This is the food of Nepal. It's really, really tasty. Sometimes I tell people that I wouldn't have lasted as long as I have in Nepal had it not been for the food, but it's many things. But this is what traditional food looks like. This is called dal bhat, and it's basically rice and lentil soup, and then vegetables and like vegetable curry, and then many different types of vegetables. And then you always have what is called an achar, or a pickle. And that is a fermented kind of spicy, sour, think like salsa is the most easily maybe, or a chutney. And that's in the bottom, the red at the bottom. So this is the food. And like I said, it's super delicious. It's really diverse. There's a lot of different versions of this. Everybody thinks like, oh, they eat dal bhat, rice and lentils every day, twice a day. And I say, yeah, but the vegetables that they use and the flavors all change from day to day. So maybe you have red lentils one day, but then at night you have green lentils or black lentils, or you have a different kind of bean. And the vegetables change, but also they do live in farming communities. So when it's cauliflower season, you eat a lot of cauliflower, or when it's mustard leaf season, you eat a lot of mustard. Nepal also has exotic animals like this one-horned rhino behind me. This is in the south of Nepal, where there's flat plains and some really beautiful national parks, where Nepal still has wild elephants, wild rhinos, wild sloth bears, and Bengali tigers, and all kinds of other exotic animals. And then this, of course, is the opposite of in the high Himalayas. This is on the Annapurna circuit, one of Nepal's most famous treks, probably second famous to Everest. But this is a picture I took doing that trek. You kind of go around a loop of the Annapurna range. In 2021, I did this trek and crossed the tallest pass in the world, the Rangla Pass. It's 5,416 meters and is spectacular. I mean, I felt like I was on a different planet, I think mostly because of maybe the lack of oxygen, but also just because it's wild what 5,000 meters and above looks like on planet Earth. And it was really hard, but it's another really beautiful aspect of what Nepal can teach you in terms of that you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other, that there's like really hard things that will happen and really hard lessons to learn, and that ultimately the art of trekking or meditation or any of these things is like putting one foot in front of the other. And so this was a really spectacular moment. And this is just outside of our sites where we work in central Nepal. This is me with my lover and soon-to-be husband, and we get to work together at Conscious Impact and get to explore Nepal together. And I get to see all of this beauty and learn from it, and ultimately share it with the world. We get to invite a lot of people to Nepal, and it's something that I really, really enjoy, is sharing this space and this work with people. And yeah, that's the end of my slides. I'm just gonna maybe stop sharing here if I can figure out how to do that. And Dr. Nollert, hi, I see you now. Let me see if I can. Oh, here we go. Hi.
Hey, Beth, thank you so much for sharing that. It was so exciting to hear that. Let me start by inviting the participants that we have. If any of them have any questions, please type them into the Q&A button that you'll find on the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get to those questions depending on how much time we have. But I have so many thoughts and questions that I was thinking of while listening to that. That was really cool. You answered some of my questions. Okay. One of my question was, what's the highest that you've ever been? Is the pass that was the highest that you ever got to?
Yeah. So what is that in feet? I need to do a quick math, but it was really high and really hard and spectacular. It was 17,765 feet.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I just right. You know, and this is what, half of Everest, or maybe 2/3 of Everest, something like that.
Yeah,
It only
2/3.
gets like worse after that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I hear people tell me that when they go to Everest Base Camp, it's like they can't sleep and it's really hard to breathe. And I'm like, why'd you go? But we're interested in those kinds of experiences.
Okay, so you've had this great experience. So let me start by, asking sort of the more challenging type of questions. I by the way, I love the picture of the Unitops lab. I hope that those experiences helped you in the challenges that you faced while in Nepal.
Definitely.
But okay, so you talked a little bit about what really sort of sparked your interest was the medical mission trip that you did as an undergraduate, and so I know a lot of students are very interested in doing these sort of short-term visits to rural, impoverished communities to provide some sort of medical experience.
Mhm.
And sort of now in hindsight, I'm curious, so what's your take? Is this a good thing? Should we be doing this, or should we not be encouraging young people to go and do that? Should they think of perhaps other ways? And what do you think?
It's a really good question. And something I ponder a lot about myself, but I think a lot of it depends on who you're going with. I think the hosting organization is really important to evaluate and look at. A lot of my perspective also comes from, I think people are going to travel, and that if you're going to travel and you can add some element of service work to your travel, that is a really effective way to give back to a place rather than just experience and explore a place. And it's a way to add, in my opinion, add more sustainability towards travel. If you're going to fly all the way across the world, then at least do something good, plant a few trees, do something meaningful. But you do have to do sound research and make sure that the work that you're actually doing is helpful. And I think in a lot of situations, organizations can get into really risky dynamics where they create work to make people traveling there to do that work feel good about themselves rather than actually work that does good for the community. And so there's a couple of really good organizations I can suggest, and some really good websites. Like Grassroots Volunteering is a really good website that does a lot of like sound research on the organizations. But one of the best things to do is like talk to somebody from that organization and ask those questions. Ask like, well, how do you know what this project is going to do in 5 years? And have they evaluated what the work that you're doing is really going to do? How much community participation is there? Something that's really important for us at Conscious Impact is that sometimes it seems like we have all these volunteers come in, and then does the community get this feeling like, oh, they don't need to participate because the volunteers are just going to do it. And so we really work hard to create a dynamic where the volunteers aren't really doing that much work. Actually, they're doing more learning, and really they're there to give this kind of like solidarity towards local community members, but really the local community's work is what matters, and that takes full priority for us. And so I think that if you're going to visit an organization that's doing something like that, then your trip can be really educational and really change and broaden your perspective. And if that's why you're doing it, and you're doing it in a good organization, then I say do it, because it can change your life and it can make you want to continue doing it forever, which is, I think, a good life path personally.
Cool. So you talked a lot about that you've learned so much and you've changed in some ways. And since I knew you 10 years ago, I'm actually really curious about, do you have some other specific examples? You mentioned resilience, you mentioned a couple of things, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the part that for me is just so interesting, because I know you, and like, I mean, I'll just share very briefly that, you came the first time. I mean, I do in fact remember the first time I met you, and you came into my office, and you were a pre-med, and you were going to get this doctorate degree, and these were the classes you're going to take, and these are the things you're going to do. And you were so incredibly sure of yourself. And when you left that, I'm like, oh my God, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, okay, we can laugh about it now,
Yeah.
but so that's who you were, and you're
Mhm.
clearly not there now. Anyway, so I'm curious about, what do you see as the things that you have learned? What sort of specific examples can you give?
Well, for one, I've learned to be a lot less certain of how life is going to work out. I think that, whether it's talking to earthquake victims or in general, people in life, anybody you know will tell you that their life doesn't look the way that they planned. And so as much planning and interesting aspirations as you can have, those are really important and really good to have a direction, but that also life is going to throw you a huge adventure, and that's really exciting, and that equally to that adventure, what's really important, and I think this is something Nepal has taught me, is that also simple life is good enough, that you don't have to, people live really simple lives in Nepal, and yet they're so important. The land that the Himalayas represents, the land mass, and what it does ecologically for the rest of its surrounding neighbors and countries is really important. And the way that farmers just feed people, that simple action of feeding people is way more valuable than I ever could have imagined. And so I think those are some differences. It's just like the simple things. Like I really feel where my food comes from now more than ever. And I really have a different connection to food and sustenance than I did previously. Waste, things like whatever you create, it doesn't just go away. Like, it's nice to pretend like you can just flush a toilet and it disappears, or that you throw garbage in the trash, whether it's food or non-food, and it goes away. But the reality is that's not the case. And so I think like some of these simple like lifestyle changes have happened to me. I think also just being comfortable to not know what's going on. I think one of the questions was, how long did it take me to learn Nepali? It took me an embarrassingly long time. But I do speak it and can read and write. But it took like the better part of 5 years. And I spent a lot of time not knowing what was going on, and also still do today have conversations where I'm not in charge. I'm not talking in the conversation. I don't have any role. I'm just there to kind of listen and support. And if I'm asked to do something, then I respond. But I think I come from a culture where we're a lot more comfortable to feel like every moment has to be comfortable to us and about us. And so we kind of expect that from the world around us, that it's like all about me. And I've definitely dropped that. I definitely feel I can just sit and be and listen to what people are experiencing. And if I'm asked, then I try to support, but not needing to have every answer all the time. Something I probably still struggle with from time to time, but is something that has definitely changed.
Okay. So I'm going to go and grab a couple questions off the chat. So one that I had not considered asking, but I think is really interesting, is that did you ever worry about your personal safety? Not so much from people, but just you're living in a tent in a fairly remote rural area. You showed us pictures of animals and such. Was that ever a concern?
So Not really. I think so the wild animals that exist, they definitely exist, but they're far away from rural villages, as you would imagine. Unless you're in the South. In the South, you have like rhinos walk into ATMs all the time and those kinds of things. But we're in the mid hills, and the mid hills are interesting. I think the reason they're highly populated is because they're a really mild place to live. There's not diseases, malaria, mosquitoes can't travel up that high. There's not dengue, there's very low disease, and then there's also very low poisonous animals or insects, like no snakes, whereas now I do some work in Ecuador where it's a very different situation, and I probably wouldn't feel so comfortable living in a tent. So I think it was really lucky and circumstance to be so safe in a tent for so long.
Cool. One other question from the chat is that you talked about people using wood as fuel. What about the idea of there are some various solar options for cooking or providing power or whatever. Is that something that looks to be sustainable, or is there a way to use that?
So there are some solar projects that go on in Nepal, funded by NGOs, and they work really well in the high mountain areas where there's less access to wood. They use a lot more solar cooking. In the mid hills where there's still, it's like I think it's about 60% is still forested. There's so much access to wood, and there's such little population in reality to that, that they can sustainably harvest wood, dead wood, and that's enough to survive off of. But there's a lot of transition. A lot of people still cook on firewood, but a lot of people are shifting to gas and gas stoves just for the ease, and there's road development. So now that there's roads, you no longer have to, carry everything on your back. So you can have a truck bring it in. And so that's a lot of how Nepal is changing right now.
Okay. So another question that I had was, particularly with the recent earthquake in Turkey, Syria, and the history in Nepal, what do you think about trying to affect public policy in terms of how some of the rebuilding, particularly for the communal structures like the school and such, do you guys play a role in advocating for various technologies or encouraging various building techniques or other things to try to minimize future since there's going to be another earthquake? We know that.
Absolutely. So because we were in the rebuilding process so intensely for the first 3 years or so of our work, we did a lot of working with local government and regional government. All of the rebuilding, I don't quite know enough about how it's happening, how they're going to approach it from Turkey and Syria. It'll probably be a little while. In Nepal's case, after an earthquake, there's about 6 months of emergency aid that is just kind of assumes nobody's doing any building and is just about getting people food, water, and immediate shelter. And then it took Nepal about another year to then establish building codes. And then they established engineers within rural sites that could approve constructions. And so when you're building your house as a Nepali person, you had to go get approval from the government. The government would come and check 3 different stages throughout your building process. And so we were very heavily working with mason teams because we were using a new technology. We wanted to make sure that all of our houses passed. And it was really important. The unfortunate reality is that there's a lot of influences that affect the building codes. And at the end of it all, what we saw was that in rural communities, people don't have the resources to invest in structures that cost that much. So if the building code says put a rebar, reinforced steel every 1.2 meters throughout your wall, people would convince their mason to kind of skip 1 or skip 2 because it would reduce the cost. And the government engineers weren't going to not approve that house. It's like it's really difficult, I would say, to influence those building changes. I would say most of the buildings that were built were by far much better than previously and had much more reinforcement than previously. But did it meet all of the standards that were set? And, those standards are set with people's safety in mind, but it doesn't meet people with like the realities of where they're coming from, that they don't have the ability to do all of those things. And the system to kind of enforce those policies is also not there. It's just not formalized enough yet. But we did our best. We really had to work hard to convince people that the earth blocks weren't going to like fall down immediately, because everybody was sure that we just made soil bricks and like that wasn't going to keep their house strong. And then two, to show them that by using our technology, it was actually a lower cost option overall. And so that was the biggest selling point we had, was that you can build your house completely to code, no like cheating, no skipping, like, rebars or whatever, and still save money. And so that was a lucky kind of thing that we were able to talk to people about, but it was hard. It was really hard to convince people to build in a certain way.
Right. Okay. Another question. Someone writes, on our trip to Kathmandu 5 years ago, one of our most ingrained memories was of the religious ceremonies along the Ganges River. Had you get a chance to see those in person? What did you think of them?
Yeah, so there's a lot of religion deeply tied into daily life in Nepal. It's like, you're walking down like a bustling metropolitan city street of Kathmandu that's urbanizing and industrializing. And there's temples all over the place, like in the most odd places, and then similarly to their experience, there's religious ceremonies happen all the time. I think Nepal has like 44 holidays per year, and that's just the national ones. But then there's every ethnic group has their own New Year and has their own everything. And so there's so much life and culture really ingrained in Nepal. It's so unique. And the river ceremonies, there's a lot of different ones, but a lot of the, like in Kathmandu, where the Bagmati River is like what feeds the Ganges, they do cremation ceremonies most often. And so every day they're doing open cremations, because in Hinduism, that is how you pass over to the next afterlife. And then your ashes are then released into the river, and the river takes you to that afterlife. And so it's a really spectacular thing to witness, something that is really unique. And it's I got to experience really closely with my partner's grandmother, who passed away last year. She was 86 and died of old age, and we went to the temple and did her ceremony. And it's a really interesting process to like come to grips with life and death so commonly, and it's something that people who are in Nepal experience all the time. And but it's a beautiful aspect of just coming to grips with that right away, and you're letting go, but you're letting go into something that is unknown, and that it can be a continuation of life even after this. And so it was it's very unique culture, and super old, super traditional, and lots of beautiful ways that I can't even begin to understand. And I've been there for 8 years. And there's sometimes I'm always asking, like, what does that mean? Like, they just put that fruit on top of that thing, and like now they're doing something else, and what does that mean? And somebody's like, oh, you'll have to read the book to understand, but that's just what we do. That's what we do. And I'm like, okay, that's what we do.
Okay, another question from the Q&A says, conscious impact has localized itself, staying in a limited local area. There are dozens of Western volunteer organizations working in Nepal. Could you discuss the on-the-ground differences in these organizations as between yours and very large multi-location organizations such as Oxfam?
Great question. It's one of our biggest differences is that we don't have any goal to expand. We don't have any plan to become, even in multiple sites in Nepal, we're like really stationed in one region of Nepal. It's the Nepalchuk region. It's a big region, but nevertheless, we just feel that that is where we're most equipped to understand the local culture and community and understand what we can do to play a role in the development. And what we believe is that by doing that, we're able to really be efficient in our work and localized such that we can create a model that then can be replicated. But then another organization who wants to do a project similar of reforestation or with farmers in Eastern Nepal can look at our projects and look at all of our information and our reporting and talk to our team, and that can be implemented there. But we get all of our donations from private donors. We don't have quite the large extent of donations that would need to happen to go beyond our locality. And we feel like we're able to be most efficient in that way. However, Oxfam and the other big NGOs, they're crossing tons of places. They're doing lots of things. And they have huge teams to do so, huge money to do so. And for us, the difference is that we really know the community. Like, I know them by names. The board members of our organization know community members' houses that we rebuilt by names. They've been to those houses. They've seen those houses. It's a much more personal approach. And we also know that they struggle through things, like we were there on site during COVID. So rather than just like saying like COVID happened and we're closing our doors and we're going back home to where we're safe, we stayed open throughout COVID and really tried to work with local leaders at keeping people safe, but also continuing things like education, because it wasn't so simple for everybody to just go online and learn in rural Nepal. Like, nobody can do that. So how does education continue? And so by being really local based and really understanding our stakeholders and players in the local community, we feel we can be effective at solving a problem really quick, a problem that comes up out of nowhere. And then figuring out like, okay, what can we do? And we're also able to be really flexible so that when our initial solution to that problem doesn't work for whatever reason, we can say like, hey, that's not working. Stop that. And let's switch it and change how we're doing this to make it more effective. And that's something that big NGOs don't often have the ability to do because they're on grant funding, which is the long-term project and process, and they need to report. And so sometimes they're just doing the work because that's what they've got to report on, whether or not it's the most effective thing that the community wants at that time. It may be really effective and really helpful to that goal that they set out to do, but it may not actually take the community's participation in priority.
Well, thanks. That's clearly you've thought a lot about that. So yes. here's a more fun question. So pick one. What's your favorite part of living in Nepal?
Oh my goodness. I would say the diversity. I mean, it is such a diverse place. The people, the landscape, everything in between is so diverse, and it's phenomenal. I mean, to think of like a tiny little country like Nepal having 100+ ethnic groups and languages spoken and written, and trading that has happened across these cultures for centuries. And so, yeah, I would say the diversity.
Okay, and then we're getting close to the end of our time together. So there is a great question in the chat, for the question is, how could Rotary International get involved in Nepal, and contact numbers for those people involved. So let me ask you then to be a little bit more specific on people that actually are wanting to get more involved, find out more about what you're doing and how to get involved. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Rotary Club can definitely get involved. We have some good connection to the International Rotary Club that's based in Kathmandu, and I've done several speaking events with that club. And for volunteering at Conscious Impact, you really just have to go to our website, consciousimpact.org. You can fill out a form that shows you're interested. There's a couple of different forms. If you're interested to bring a group of people, that's one type of form. And if you're interested just to come yourself. That's a different form. And we have a lot of different immersive programs ranging from like 4-day programs where you can plant trees. We have a lot of those programs in May and June. And then we have longer term programs that are like, if you want to learn how to build with earth bags, you can come and get a workshop from our team on how to build with earth bags. And so there's a lot of different ways to get involved, but just go to our website. There's contact email. If you're confused about which form to fill out, you can email us and we'll get back to you. And we love having people come and visit. It's one of the things that helps fund our work constantly. So we get private donations, but all the participants that come on our programs also do fundraising for the work. And so it's a way for you to really experience, okay, as a person who's fundraising, I'm going to go and I'm going to see what this work is about, see how this money is used, see what is going on, and learn.
Right. Well, Beth, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I really loved hearing about that. I think the world of you when you were here, in spite of where you were when you were here, but you have, you're always a great person, and it's just so exciting to get a chance to talk with you and find out all the things that you're doing. I'm so excited for both you personally and professionally. I'm really happy. Look forward to, we're friends on Facebook. We will keep in touch. I will always look 100%. For your pictures. Oh, by the way, the pictures were just incredible. Oh my God. Did anybody ever say that to you? That's just like,
you got to come to Nepal, see it in person. It doesn't even do it.
I'm so excited. I'm like, okay, let's see. When can I convince my wife? It's like, hey, we're going to go to Nepal. And she's like, where is Nepal? What are you talking about? And like, what are we going to do? We're going to plant some trees when we get there. Yeah. Don't worry, it'll be great. Beth says it's great. I know it's going to be great.
Exactly. Thanks, Dr. Nollert. Thanks so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, like always. And you were so influential on my time at OU. It really shaped so much and gave me this comfort place I needed to be able to go through career changes and thought changes. And the beginning of my mind broadening was a lot in your office. So I really appreciate you and what you still do there at OU and for students just like me.
Great. Thank you so much. Look forward to hearing more about your adventures in the future. Okay? Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.